of our series in the real business advice. As you know, we interview various different business owners really about their experiences of having their own business. So do you want to give me a bit about your background and the type of business that you run?
Yeah, first of all, it's nice to be talking to you today. I know business advice has been a big part of your professional life, and it's something you're passionate about. So it's a pleasure to be joining you and to be sort of talking around these issues today. My own professional background is in publishing. That's where I set up a business, which I ran for maybe about 25 years until quite recently. And it's a business that gave me a good living, and it also gave me a lot of pleasure in the working environment. So my experience of working for myself, starting a business, was a positive one, and one that it is something that I would be keen to encourage other people to do.
Okay, so if you hadn't done your own business, because you also, I mean, I know a little bit about your background. You had a business before publishing as well. So if you hadn't done that one, or what would you have done if you hadn't ended up sort of running your own businesses?
Yeah, Neil, before striking out on my own, I had what probably was a reasonably successful career in local government. My first degree was in town planning, but I went on subsequently to work in leisure in local government, and I had a subsequent leisure professional qualification, and I did enjoy that career. However, I did eventually become quite frustrated by, I suppose, the sort of very, very tight structures involved in local government, the lack of ability to act on your own initiative. And that kind of eventually led me to think local government wasn't going to be my natural home, despite the fact that I had made some progress in my career, and again, I had enjoyed the work. I just felt that striking out on my own, starting my own business was just really something I had to do.
And when you started, I mean, what was your sort of aspiration for the business? Like, how did you go from local government to publishing? Because that's quite a different.
It is quite a jump. You're right, because essentially you're working in what's quite a non-commercial environment and moving over and running a small business to what's really quite a cutthroat and demanding commercial environment. What I did attempt to do, which wasn't the easiest thing, but in my working life in a big city leisure department, I tried to look at the type of work that I was involved in and see if there were opportunities to almost like create commercial packages around that work. And I was involved in the Professional Institute, and that institute organised seminars and exhibitions. So really the flagship products in my early publishing business was around a new leisure publication, and was also around the experience that I'd built up in organising seminars and exhibitions. And I intended to do that again, and hopefully to do it in a commercially successful way. It didn't really quite pan out exactly like that. Although I did launch what I thought was a publication that seemed to get a good response from my public, which was the leisure professionals working in Scotland, it didn't progress quickly enough. And it meant that my first year in business was difficult. It was only really when I realised that the skills that I built up in publishing were skills that people were actively seeking. Again, other public sector organisations, other sports bodies seemed to be interested in the services that I could provide in producing bespoke publications, and sort of providing an all-round management package, which included print management, the production of content, advertising sales, which was an important part of the package of services that I was offering. So it took a little while for what was to become the business that I was running as key service to Forum. And along the way, we maybe there was one or two wrong turnings or roads that turned out to be cul-de-sacs, but soon we found ourselves, if you'll forgive the analogy, on an open highway, and we made good progress there.
So was there any time in that first year where you thought, oh my God, what have I done? Given that, it maybe wasn't all plain sailing the way that you'd expected it to be, and, you had some challenges that you had to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, Neil, I came from a job in local government, and that job was pretty well remunerated. It wasn't too demanding. Life was pretty straightforward. I could have carried on quite happily doing that for the next 20 or 25 years, collected my very reasonable pension, and that would have all been a fairly, steady bit of progress.
Yeah.
However, as I say, and I think you appreciate this and you understand it, when you're kind of driven to go out and test yourself, and that's part of your makeup, then you just do that. You just do it. However, the specific question about the first year, yeah, there were times when I thought, what have I done? I've left behind all of that security, and things are looking as if they might not work out. In fairness and in retrospect, I think that's a common situation with businesses. That early days can be very they can sail through choppy waters. I did get good support when I started out in business at first from one of the local development companies, and I remember one of their managers describing how businesses work, and their analogy was as a sort of businesses were like a steam train or a locomotive train, that it took a long while for it to build up speed, but once it started running and once it was going at speed, then it carried a lot of momentum, and it carried a lot of momentum forward. And I thought that was a really good way of describing what happens in business for a lot of people.
Yeah, so it's really tough to, I don't know, stoke the engine if you carry on with the analogy. I guess there's a lot of hard work goes into stoking it, but once you eventually get it going forward, then it carries itself a bit of the way.
It carries itself a bit of a way, yeah. The other thing I think that looking back and kind of assessing the things that you did right and the things that you could have done better, I suspect that if I just had a bit of a fuller understanding of that concept of the locomotive, it would have meant that in the early days I would have been less antsy, less nervous, and I would have been, I would have had a better awareness that you don't need to make a lot of money in year one. You don't have to make a lot of money in year two. You just need to make a bit of progress. And then in years 3 and 4, things will look brighter. And after that, if you've made the good decisions in the early years, then that bears fruit further down the line.
So I thought it was interesting, and probably to a lot of people, when you said like the first sort of idea, I guess, or project that you started with didn't quite pan out the way you expected, or maybe not as quickly as you expected it. So, I mean, what was your sort of process or decision making to think, well, okay, I still want to keep running the business myself, but how did you decide on what you were going to do next?
Well, Neil, I think this will be true of everybody. I didn't actually make that decision. That decision was made by the marketplace. It was made by a ringing telephone that was asking that those phone calls were asking about certain of the products and services that we were offering. And once you start responding to what the market's asking you, then you start to succeed. And you have to be, I think, when you start a business, be aware that as good and as strong as your ideas are, that you really need to modify them in the face of demand. It seems like a very obvious thing to say, and it is a truism, but it's something that's it's just something that struck me very, very forcibly in those early years. I started to succeed when I started to give the products and services that people wanted, rather than the products and services that I thought they might want.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting point, because I guess, when you're putting your heart and soul into starting something and you've got quite a strident view of what that should be, actually that's quite a clever way of putting it, that okay, you get a better idea, I guess, once you're actually in the thick of it, as to what people actually want, which might not be quite exactly what you thought it was going to be, but yeah, as long as you listen, then the opportunities suddenly start springing up.
Yes, that's right. That was my personal experience. When I look back on that first year, and I look back in one particular product, which at the end of the first year I thought had failed. But if I knew what I knew 5 years later, I would have realised it hadn't failed. It had only taken. It was just taking time to develop and to progress. And one of my business regrets would be not to have decided to ditch that product. I ditched it at too early a stage. I should have really ran with it and lived with it. And I'm sure that particular product would have still today, 20, 25 years later, would have been providing a nice income stream. But those are the lessons, sometimes quite hard lessons, that you learn.
Yeah. So if you were looking back and giving yourself advice, with hindsight, what would it be?
Uh, I'm going to cheat a little bit here, Neil, and say prior to setting up the business I was involved in, I did a business acceleration course with the local development agency. And one of the business mentors there was a very, very intelligent and charming man called Kerry Nappock. Kerry was actually from California, but he had settled in Edinburgh. And Kerry was a very, I'd say, talented and visionary business person. He worked across the commercial and the voluntary sector, so he had a real width of experience. Kerry's two particular bits of advice were: one, prior to starting a business, try where possible to trial the products and services that you want to offer. Trial them in a small way. Trial them so you can modify your original ideas to maybe meet what the market's looking for. Trial them to find out what the faults and the glitches are in your services or in your products. And I thought that was an excellent piece of advice. Kerry's other piece of advice, and I mean, Neil, this isn't to use that terrible cliche. It's not rocket science. It seems quite obvious. Kerry underlined that in business, you're going to come across people who are maybe operating in the same sector. They're maybe operating with products that are complementary to the services that you're offering, maybe to people who are going to be your suppliers or you're going to supply. And he said, be really positive about entering into partnerships of all shapes and sizes and of all scales. And that can be really, really worthwhile. Don't be shy about contacting people and saying, I'm hoping to do this. I think this might be of interest to you. I think this might be of benefit to you. Are there ways in which we can work together, or are there ways in which we can help each other? And I thought that was another excellent piece of advice from Kerry Nappock. Sadly, Neil, I don't know that, even though at the time both of those things struck me, I took that advice as well as I should have done. It's easy to listen to advice, but just, I think you touched on it, when you've got that drive in the early part of the business cycle, when you're starting something, you really do have to be very focused and almost single-minded. And sometimes that focus and single-mindedness maybe means that you don't see the bigger picture. Kerry, I think, was trying to show me the bigger picture. He might have, he might have had a little influence, but I only wish I'd listened more closely, and I also wish I'd followed that advice more closely. I thought those were two excellent pieces of business direction.
Yeah, I think particularly, when you're starting up, but I'm actually quite a big supporter of, just business coaching in general, because I think, well, if you look at sports teams, they all have coaches, and yet a lot of the time you say to a business owner, or talk to them about having a coach, and they don't really see the value in it. But I think a lot of the time it's actually quite useful to have somebody there who's holding you to account. Uh, it doesn't have to be the hairdryer treatment like Alex Ferguson, but something along these lines.
It's a really good point, Neil. And when you're speaking and you're mentioning that, it does make me think, when you're a business owner, when you're the manager of a business, where you're looking after, the interests of a group of people as an employer, it can be quite a lonely place.
Yeah.
You'll often feel that you're being pulled in lots of different directions, and it is nice, or it can be rewarding to have a discussion with someone who has your interests at heart, but is slightly detached from the day-to-day working environment that you find yourself in. So the idea of coaching and mentoring, I think when you're mentioning it in that way, that strikes me as being something that could be really valuable to business managers, to business owners.
Yeah. So in terms of the decisions you've made, I've got two questions round about these. So what's the best decision you've made, and what's the hardest decision that you've made?
The best decision and the hardest decision. Okay, it's quite a tough question to answer. The best decisions are almost invariably around the people that you work with, whether that's the people who come to work with your business, or whether that's the business partners that you find yourself working in projects with, whether that's clients that stay with you for a number of years. Those would be the best decisions, I think, selecting the right people, both to work in your organisation and to work with. When you make a wrong call there, you can find yourself working with someone who may, in other circumstances, be able to make a really big contribution. But in the circumstances of your business or your projects, they're not making so much of a contribution. That can be difficult. And likewise with clients, when you get a good client, and you get a client that appreciates the job that they're doing for you, that are happy to see you properly rewarded, and that give you the confidence that you're providing a good service for them, then those can be really positive things and can give your business a big boost.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Certainly in terms of clients, I mean, it's really tough when you're starting, because I think for the majority of people, they just want to see some income coming in. But I think one of the things when I've been speaking to people, is basically selecting the right clients, which is tough, because, as I say, you want to get some income coming in, but that has a long term, or it can have a long term effect on your business. If you're working with better clients that fit the type of profile that you want, that can have a huge impact on all sorts of things.
You also asked me about maybe the decisions that you look back and you question yourself about. Maybe I could return to a point I was making earlier, and that is not so much about making bad decisions, but maybe not having enough confidence in the early stages of a business, and even in the later stages. It can be difficult for people who come from who don't necessarily come from a commercial background, and by that I mean maybe people whose parents or families haven't aren't in a haven't worked in a
Yeah.
business environment, their own business, which is probably most people. I think if you have come from that kind of background where your parents have been involved in a business, they're able to kind of show you that how things work, and they're able to sort of like advise you in a way that you're able to not make so many of those early mistakes. And they almost make the world of business like a natural area. When you come to that new, when you come to that fresh, you can sometimes have a lack of confidence in your own abilities that you should have. My own experience has been that as my business developed and my business grew, and I added to my client list and I added to the product list, you develop a capability in your business, but you also build up a confidence in your capability, so you can approach people with a real feeling of, I'm running a good company. I've got good products. I can really do something, for the people that you're approaching, and I think that's a really key thing.
Well, I guess that shines through as well when you're talking to them. When you've got that sort of confidence as well in what you're actually trying to sell them.
And you do have the situation when you build up a client base that invariably you'll be referring to Jack Brown at the Scottish Football Association was really pleased with the products we were providing there, the publications, the online information. We feel we can do a similar job for you.
Yeah.
It's a virtuous circle.
Okay. Who's been your biggest influence in business?
My biggest influence in business? Well, as I say, obviously I referred to Kerry earlier, and what I liked about Kerry, although I only knew him, sadly he died a few years ago, in the latter part of his life. What impressed me about him was not just his intellect or his business acumen, but he struck me as being a really decent man and someone who enjoyed life and enjoyed business life. And that made me think that the world of business doesn't always have to be desperate and cutthroat and, kick your rivals where it hurts. It can be competitive, and we enjoy the competitive part of it. But it's also important to be cooperative, to work with people, and to actually behave in an ethical fashion that means you build a reputation, and that reputation sticks with you. People who know you tell other people about you, your business, your services, your approach, and that can be very important, and also it can be very rewarding. It can be rewarding in a financial sense, but it can also be rewarding in just the satisfaction that you get out of running a successful commercial operation.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things these days that, I guess like businesses striving to be greener than they maybe were, but I think, having an ethical approach, that's probably something that should never really have been out of fashion. I don't know that it necessarily was, but yeah, I think that's been something that should have always been important, or has always been important when you've been running a business.
I think maybe just what you're saying there, what I said earlier, is that there aren't really any shortcuts in life, and there aren't any shortcuts in business. You really have to work hard at it. You really have to behave in a professional way, and when you do that, maybe at the time you think, oh, okay, maybe do something in a slightly easier fashion. But I think that always comes back to bite you in the bum. You're always best making difficult decisions when they crop up. In the short term, that might be difficult. In the longer term, my own experience has been that that's always the best thing to do.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. In terms of, I'm a sort of quite an avid reader of various different business books, and now that podcasts are on the scene, it's even worse because there's a multitude of podcasts that you can listen to as well. But do you have any favourites or any recommendations?
I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit old school here. I do remember being quite influenced by Tom Peters and the Tom Peters books, but that would have been some time ago. I was fortunate enough to be at the Glasgow Concert Hall. This was about 20 years ago, and Tom Peters was one of the speakers. But there's been I suppose, a number of people in the business guru category. I mentioned Tom Peters, I mentioned Kerry Napper, Covey as well. Yeah, so I've always taken a good general interest. I always liked Business Insider, and yeah, that would be if that would be my answer to that question.
Yeah, okay. In terms of like your running your business, what did it allow you to achieve? I mean, I know you'd said given us some of the reasons why you started off on your own originally, but what did you feel it allowed you to achieve in your life, or
Well, it does. I mean,
professionally?
it does afford you an incredible degree of independence. There's a lot of responsibility, but the idea that you can bring forward ideas, that you can think creatively, and that you can try to implement those ideas, and that's a very, very powerful thing. I mentioned earlier that my background was in local government. The opportunities to actually come up with good ideas and to implement those ideas was very, very limited. And that invariably sort of gnaws at you a little bit. You know that you're not giving of your best. You know that you're not being able to produce your best work. So actually working in the commercial sector, working in a business that you've managed to create yourself, it gives you an enormous amount of energy. It gives you a real ability to work hard and to work productively. And it's something that I'm really glad that I did. And yeah, and I think it's something that more and more people should have the opportunity to do.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that as well. I mean, people are living longer, but also I think that the days of staying in the one place or even having two or three different jobs over the course of your life is, yeah, more and more people seem to have a side hustle of some sort, or potentially that develops into something bigger, or they've got the ambition to set out on their own. So yeah, I think that's a good.
It's a very good point, Neil. I'm 67. I'm still working part time with the business that I established, but that's less of a focus than it was even a few years ago. But as I mentioned, my business was essentially in publishing, and it allowed me to develop writing skills. And I'm actually putting those writing skills to use just now. I've always been interested in creative writing. I'm working in a couple of projects in that area just now. You never know when you're writing a piece of fiction how it's going to, if it's going to work out, if people are going to be interested. But that's currently something that is keeping me busy and it's keeping me optimistic.
Brilliant. I think if these go really well, Terry, I'll be touting this broadcast round to a few publishers saying, like, we got the initial one, we heard it first. If you had a magic wand, that you could change anything about your business, or I mean, I guess for you it might be looking back retrospectively, maybe. What would it be?
It's a strange question, and also in a sense, a sort of, I suppose, Neil, you're framing questions so that we can have a discussion. But to my way of thinking and to just the way that my mind works, I never really think about that, look back and think I would have done things differently, because all of your decisions, the quality of the decision you make, the type of decisions you come up with, you do them at that time with the best of your abilities. And really, I think not so much a magic wand. I don't think I'd be interested in a magic wand, because it's a sort of make believe thing. What I would be interested in was being able to use all of those experiences about the decisions you've made, right or wrong, and really analyze those and have them give you the ability to make the next decision as optimally as possible.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there's a sort of theme come through that, a lot of the decision making and the decisions that you take, I guess you live with them as a business owner, for better or for worse in some respects. And there's some of what I'm trying to do with this is, for people to sort of shortcut the mistakes or, make better decisions by listening to the experience of others. Because,
Sure.
yeah, I guess
I
it's,
suppose I suppose I'm saying there's no point crying over spilt milk.
yeah,
At the same time as you have to be aware when you're going to make a decision and you're making a call to try and be as analytical and as weigh up as many factors as possible, which is all very easy to say, isn't it? When you know that in the heat of battle you're going to be following that business nose of yours. Yeah.
yeah, no, I think that's good advice. I mean, in terms of things that you use today, do you have any sort of favorite business apps or any tools that you use?
Again, Neil, I'm almost embarrassing myself by being so old school. But when I set up my business at first, publishing business, part of the product, the services we were offering was an advertising sales service. So we created our own database, and it was a very straightforward database. But that database we were still using 20, 25 years later. The colleague who created that was a man called Alan Nicholson. And I haven't seen Alan for a few years, but if I saw him, and I hope I do bump into him over the next few years, I'm going to say to him, Alan, you've no idea how much good service we got from that database system that you introduced way back in the 20th century. It stayed with us for a long time and gave us a really fantastic bit of service. And so that I'm kind of giving away my business vintage there, Neil. So my apologies.
I think with that though, what's quite interesting there is, there's new tools and new apps that come out all the time, and there's a temptation sometimes to jump to the next newest shiniest thing, but actually it's the quality of the information that's been held within them rather than maybe the way that they actually operate. That obviously, over time you need to change, but yeah, there's maybe a lesson there that it's what you put in. I mean, you've talked about publishing a little bit. What's the sort of biggest changes that you've seen? Because you've been in the actual industry for a while, and I guess things have changed since you started.
Yeah, even though I entered that business sector as a relative novice, I remember putting together magazines with bits of film. It's just that the whole digitization of a sector that was previously run in just a very, very different way. And that desktop computers, digitalization, the use of the internet, has had made it possible for somebody like me with imagination and a willingness to learn to be able to create an organization that produced publications that we had print runs of 6 figures, 100,000 plus. So and that was happening almost on a month by month basis in the first decade of my business, and I was able to take advantage of that. And even today, the business morphed from essentially publications that were hard copy to online information, and we were able to make that transition reasonably successfully, still retaining some part of our old traditional activity. But we've been flexible enough to do that, and yeah, and you need that flexibility in business.
And what's your sort of view on like the printed word, I guess? Because I mean, there's even if you went back a few years, when the Kindle came out, it was like, okay, that's books are dead. But
Yeah.
I don't know. There's still magazines on the shelves and shops. And I mean, what's your personal views on whether printed publications have a long-term life or?
Yeah, sure. I think they do. It's a much more accessible. It's a much more personal way to access information. And it's also, I am somebody who likes to touch and feel things. I like to touch and feel books. I like to touch and feel magazines. I mean, of course, we all like the convenience of online information. We like the fact that everything happens very, very quickly. But at the same time, for that deeper quality of experience, I think print magazines and obviously books, they've got quite a considerable shelf life yet to come.
Okay. And with the customers that you were dealing with, I mean, obviously, there was an element of it you were selling to them, but you were also providing them a service. Was there anything that you sort of thought or there was a theme in terms of the sort of mistakes that they sometimes made? Not necessarily in their own businesses, but just in general, whether that was, the way they advertised or, uh,
Yeah, what I think, Neil, is certainly as a publisher, as someone who was responsible for the content of magazines, someone who would actually write material. I always used to write my articles and stories and features, um, and would tell the reader about them. I didn't want to tell the reader about myself. I wanted to really tell the reader about what they might be doing, what they might think about doing, what they were doing, and how they might develop the things that they were doing. And I think that that's a key for all businesses, that they it's I suppose it's in simple terms a customer focus. That would maybe be the thing that you would always try to underline to your clients, for them to make sure that their business focus was sharp, that they were certainly, when you're talking about information and promotional material and marketing, that they always went out to tell their customers and their potential customers about themselves, and not about the business, about what that business was doing. That's kind of like of secondary importance. The key thing is you tell your customers and potential customers about themselves, and maybe you give them a hint about things that they might need. And I think that's the road to success.
yeah, I think that was a brilliant marketing message, actually. Uh, uh, for you yourself, I mean, what sort of traits do you think that you've got that helped you succeed over the years? I know you touched on maybe a couple of things.
Yeah, I mean, like everybody, there'll be strengths and weaknesses. There'll be things that I'll be good at, and there'll be things that I won't be so strong at. In terms of strengths, I would say imagination and the ability to imagine around new products in a way that new products might work. Sometimes that's not in a very dramatic fashion. It's like maybe pulling two separate ideas together, merging them, fusing them, and kind of like turning them into a new idea. So imagination, and the ability to imagine new products and new services, that would be one. That would be a strength, I think. I wouldn't say that you often find that people with those powerful imaginations can sometimes be a little bit wanting when it comes to crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's, being really being real detail people. And that was something probably I had to work at, something I had to learn, maybe sometimes through experience. That didn't happen naturally to me. So strength, imagination, weakness, attention to detail, and that was something that I think I had to address.
On the sort of weaknesses side, do you think that was something that you had the sort of self-awareness of to start with, or did that grow over time?
I think it'd be a little of both. I think I would be aware that you really need to cover all the bases. One of the things that I felt when I started my own business, coming from local government, was I wasn't really very fit in a business sense. It's a bit like a run, Neil, and when you start running, you're maybe lucky if you can go a mile or two. With a bit of training and with a bit of work, in a year or a couple of years' time, you'll quite happily be running 5, 10, 15 miles, maybe more. And I think it's the same with business. I found myself, I had to get fit. And the fitter I got, the more capability and capacity I had, and the more I was able to deal with the things that I might not be so naturally inclined to deal with. As I say, that would be it would be the minutiae of the accounts, it would be the minutiae of the production process. And with that, with a business fitness came the ability to deal with the areas better that I felt that hadn't been my areas of strength.
Yeah, I love that phrase actually, business fitness. So I think, yeah, I'm going to steal that for use somewhere. I'm not sure where yet, but we'll use that.
And
So
I'm not sure whether it's something that you recognise. It's something, that notion, that concept that even though you've got a lot of energy and you've got a lot of drive, at the same time there's almost like a day-to-day kind of fitness. It's a day-to-day kind of capability, a day-to-day sharpness that comes with maybe spending time on things that you didn't really need to spend so much time on. You then start thinking, no, I'm not going to spend an hour or an hour and a half doing that. I'm going to spend 5 minutes on it, and I'm going to get the main part of that job done. That's what I think about when I think about my business fitness.
yeah, I think with that, I always quite like the analogy of sports teams, and it's like, well, okay, that they train to do the right things, which I guess is what you're trying to do in business. You're training to become better, and it's repetition so that you do the same things to become better at it. But also, I don't know, if you've got like a winger in a football team or a hockey team, for instance, do you really want to spend a lot of time training them to put in the thundering tackles when that's never what they're going to be good at? Is it better to just get the big bruiser at the back to deal with that and let him focus on that, or her
Yeah,
focus on that?
concentrate on your strengths.
Yeah.
Another concept I think is important, and it's maybe related to business fitness, is grooving. And grooving is just simply, people might describe it as good habits, but it's just getting into those working life grooves that mean that a lot of the time we as individuals we give an awful lot of energy and time to thinking about decisions, thinking about things. I think it's great when you think about almost like a decision making process. You groove that way of thinking and you just repeat it. You don't do a lot of agonizing once that you've created a template for doing something, and that goes. I hope I'm not being too vague here, but I think that can go across a whole range of business activity.
No, I think you're exactly right. Yeah, I've probably not heard anybody term it grooving, but I think that's right in terms of being able to make things so that you're not having to you have to make enough decisions in business without having to worry about the small decisions each day, every day as well. So the more that you can just standardize things and get into a pattern, then I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. It just makes your life easier. Uh, so I'm just going to wrap up, Terry, but I've got one final question for you. So in terms of, if you were giving a bit of advice to other business owners, what would it be?
Go for it. Do it. Have confidence in yourself. Have confidence in your ability. Uh, Say to yourself mentally, this might not happen in the first couple of years. Have the mental strength to stick with it, and to have the courage of your convictions.
No, I think that's a brilliant way to sum up. Did you have any naysayers when you got started? People who were a bit negative about you being able to do it, or a drain telling you it would never work?
Neil, everybody has naysayers. In fact, I don't want to appear unpatriotic, but we do live in a country which has, has people with lots of talents and lots of ability, but we have a quite, the way I would describe it is an un-American approach. People are more likely to cast doubts when you're coming up with imaginative business ideas. It's good sometimes to have people question you so that you can, you can think through the pitfalls. But again, not wanting to be too fanciful, but the German philosopher Goethe says that boldness has a magic all of its own. And I think that's very true. And I think when you're bold in business, then you're going to be able to create magical things.
Oh, Terry, we can't carry on after that. That's actually the best way to sum up, I think. It was absolutely fantastic way to finish. So thanks for joining me on the Real Business.
It was a pleasure, Neil.
And we'll keep an eye out for your book. So if it's hitting the shelves, let me know and I'll put something up for everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. So how did that go?
Very good.